The day I was supposed to become a husband, I locked the door, opened my mother's old teak wardrobe, and pulled out a red silk sari with trembling hands. Outside, the wedding band was getting louder. The guests were laughing, my name was being shouted from every corner of the house, and the bride was already waiting under a canopy of marigolds. But inside that room, with my heartbeat punching against my ribs, I was not thinking about vows, or family honor, or the hundreds of eyes waiting to inspect me. I was staring at the mirror and whispering the one truth I had spent my whole life burying. If I walked out as the groom they wanted, I would lose myself forever. If I walked out as the person I had always been inside, I might lose everything else. And then I saw the folded note tucked into the bangles box, written in neat handwriting I recognized instantly. It was from my bride. It said, "If you come out as the man they chose, both of us will be ruined. If you come out as your truth, I will not let you stand alone." I read that note 3 times before my knees gave up, and I sat on the floor. Even now, when I think about it, that was the exact second my fate changed. Not when I wore the sari. Not when I lined my eyes. Not even when I faced the crowd. It changed when I realized the woman waiting for me was not waiting for a lie. She was waiting for my courage. My fingers shook so badly I nearly dropped the paper, and I remember laughing once, a broken, disbelieving laugh, because all those years I thought I was the only one acting in this family drama, and it turned out the bride had been reading my silence better than anyone. My name is Our Eyes, and for most of my life, that name fit me like a borrowed coat. Useful, respectable, heavy, and never truly mine. I grew up in a house where men were measured by firmness, volume, and obedience. My father's voice could straighten everyone's spine from 2 rooms away. My older cousins played cricket in the street and came home with scraped knees and swagger. I stayed close to the women, not because I was weak, but because I could breathe around them. My mother hummed while folding laundry. My aunties argued over lipstick shades as if they were discussing politics. My grandmother pinned dupattas with the calm skill of a surgeon. In their world, fabric moved, colors mattered, softness had intelligence, and every gesture told a story. That world made sense to me before I even had words for why. The first time I wore something feminine, I was 8 years old, hiding during a power cut. The adults were on the roof trying to catch a breeze. I slipped into my mother's room, touched a pale blue chiffon dupatta hanging from a chair, and lifted it over my head just to feel its weight. It was nothing and everything at once. It was light, but it changed the way I stood. It brushed against my cheeks, and suddenly I was no longer a boy pretending to be brave in the dark. I was calm. I was visible to myself. I stood in front of the mirror and watched my face become softer without changing at all. That was my first lesson, one I wish more people understood. Sometimes clothes do not hide you. Sometimes they introduce you to yourself. Of course, the world did not treat it that way. My father caught me before I could put the dupatta back. He did not slap me that day, which almost made it worse. He simply stared, as if he had found mold growing on the family name. Then he yanked the fabric off my head and said, "Never let me see this filth again." When you are a child, shame does not arrive as a philosophy. It arrives as heat. It burns the face first. I still remember how my ears rang. I still remember how I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I learned something dangerous in that moment. I learned how to split myself. One version would survive in daylight. The other would wait in silence. That split became my secret education. I learned the sound of the house when everyone slept. I learned which floorboards complained. I learned how to unlock my mother's drawer without leaving it crooked. I learned that kajal has to be smudged before it settles, that lipstick looks better when pressed into the lips instead of dragged across them, that posture changes a silhouette more than body shape ever does. Later, when people online talked about transformation like it was magic, I used to smile sadly because for me transformation was never instant. It was patience. It was observation. It was wiping off a crooked eyeliner wing and trying again. It was discovering that if you relax your shoulders, soften your hands, and stop fighting your own reflection, your whole body begins to speak a new language. I did not become someone else in those moments. I became less afraid of the someone I already was. By 16, I had built a secret routine so disciplined it felt like prayer. Once a week, when my father played cards late with his friends, I would lock my door and become the version of myself no one was allowed to know. Sometimes it was just a long skirt and a tucked-in blouse. Sometimes I draped a sari badly and started over until the pleats finally obeyed me. If you have never worn one, let me tell you something most people miss. A sari is not 6 yards of cloth. It is 6 yards of trust. One secure tuck can save your confidence. One loose pleat can destroy your whole evening. The same is true for identity. If the foundation is fear, the whole drape collapses. My mother knew long before I ever confessed it. Mothers often do. She never cornered me with questions. She never forced me into some dramatic confession. She did something much harder and kinder. She left space. One night, I forgot to hide a compact powder under my mattress. The next morning it was gone. My stomach turned to stone. I thought my father had found it. But that evening I opened my cupboard and found the compact placed neatly beside a small mirror and a packet of safety pins. No note. No lecture. Just that. For a whole minute I could not breathe. That was the second lesson that saved me. Acceptance does not always arrive with speeches. Sometimes it arrives as silence arranged carefully enough to feel like love. I wish I could say that small mercy made everything easier, but secrecy grows heavier with age. In college, I created a second life online under another name. There I posted faceless transformation clips, makeup practice, draping experiments, and little voiceovers about self-expression. I never showed my whole face. I never used my real voice. Still, strangers from around the world watched and wrote to me. Some were crossdressers. Some were questioning. Some were women who said I wore softness with more gratitude than many men wore power. Those messages kept me alive. They also taught me something my house never had. There was a language for what I felt, and there were others living between expectation and truth. That secret world would have stayed hidden much longer if my father had not arranged my marriage. I was 26 when he called me into the drawing room like a manager summoning an employee. He slid a photo across the table and said, "Her name is Meher. Good family. Educated. This will settle your life." Settle. Such a polite word for burial. The girl in the photo had intelligent eyes and the faintest half-smile, as if she knew the camera was trying too hard. I wanted to say no right there. I wanted to say I was not built for the role he was offering. But fear, that old tailor, had stitched my mouth shut again. I nodded once, and in that nod I betrayed myself more deeply than I ever had as a child. I met Meher at a family lunch where everyone pretended to leave us alone while staying close enough to hear our breathing. She wore green, spoke gently, and looked at me with unsettling directness. We exchanged the usual safe questions about work, books, weather, tea versus coffee, and future plans. I was performing well, saying all the things a decent prospective groom should say. Then, while our mothers argued in the kitchen about dessert, Meher leaned slightly closer and asked in a quiet voice, "Do you always keep your nails this carefully shaped, or is today special?" I nearly stopped breathing. It was such a small question, but it landed like thunder. My nails were trimmed and buffed more neatly than most men would bother with. No one had ever noticed out loud. I muttered something stupid about habit. She nodded once, as if filing the answer away, and changed the subject. But I left that meeting with a strange feeling I could not name. I was afraid of her, and I was curious. The engagement happened too fast for my panic to catch up. Rings were exchanged. Photos were taken. My father looked proud in that stern, victorious way he reserved for completed transactions. My mother smiled, but her eyes searched me constantly. At night, I stopped dressing entirely. The secret that once comforted me now felt dangerous. If I was going to be someone's husband, what place did my truth have? I tried to kill it with discipline. I cut down my online activity. I deleted drafts. I packed away clothes. For 2 months, I performed masculinity so hard it began to feel like a fever. People praised me for looking mature. Inside, I was disappearing. Then came the first real shock. One evening, Meher asked if we could talk privately before the wedding shopping began. We met at a quiet cafe far from both families. I expected some discussion about guest lists or honeymoon plans. Instead, she placed her phone on the table, turned it toward me, and pressed play. It was one of my old transformation videos. Faceless, but undeniably mine. Same hands. Same room corner. Same nervous way of adjusting the dupatta before facing the mirror. I swear the whole cafe went silent in that second, even though people were still moving around us. My throat closed. I was already planning lies, denials, excuses. Before I could speak, she said, "Relax. I'm not here to expose you. I'm here because I think you're suffocating." I stared at her so hard my eyes hurt. She told me she had found the video accidentally months before our first meeting through a mutual online circle. She had recognized my hands at the engagement and said nothing because she wanted to be sure. Then she told me the second truth that changed everything. She did not want this marriage either. Not because I disgusted her. Not because she hated me. But because she had her own life mapped out, her own ambitions, and no desire to become a well-decorated sacrifice in someone else's family arrangement. They think we are solving each other, she said. But they're just trapping us in different ways. That was the moment I stopped seeing her as the bride waiting for me. I started seeing her as a co-prisoner who had already found a crack in the wall. From that day on, our conversations became strangely honest. We still performed the engagement in public, but in private we spoke with a brutal clarity I had never known. I told her pieces of my story, not all at once, but enough. She listened without turning my life into a case study. She did not ask me to label myself beyond what felt safe. She did not romanticize my pain. She did something better. She treated my truth like a fact, not a spectacle. In return, she told me about the scholarship she wanted abroad, the research program she had almost accepted, the way her family had delayed every dream with the phrase, "after marriage." Somewhere between our secrets, an alliance formed. Still, an alliance is not freedom. Weddings have momentum. Once the invitations went out, it felt like even the furniture had started obeying the event. Tailors came. Jewelers called. Uncles gave advice nobody requested. My father glowed with authority. My mother moved through preparations like someone carrying both joy and dread. And then, just when I thought I might drift helplessly into the ceremony, the third blow arrived from the most predictable place possible, my cousin Samir. Every family has one person who survives by sniffing out weakness. Samir was ours. He found me on the terrace 2 weeks before the wedding, holding his phone like a weapon. On the screen was a screenshot from my anonymous account, one I thought I had deleted. My face was still half hidden, but hidden was no longer enough. "You should thank me," he said. I kept this to myself. Men like him always call extortion protection. He told me to behave, marry quietly, delete everything, and never embarrass the family. If I did not, he would show my father, my future in-laws, everyone. I listened to him with a calmness that surprised even me. There comes a point when fear becomes so familiar it stops working as a threat. Still, I was not brave enough yet. I told him I understood. I let him think I had bowed. That night, I almost ran away. I packed a small bag, took cash from my drawer, and stood at the gate after midnight. The air smelled like dust and wet earth. One step more, and I could have vanished into the city before dawn. But I thought of my mother waking up to scandal. I thought of Meher left alone to explain my disappearance. I thought of the endless story others would write in my absence. Coward. Impotent. Corrupt. Mad. People never leave silence empty. They stuff it with cruelty. So I turned around, unpacked my bag, and understood something painful. Running away was movement, but not freedom. If I left without truth, the lie would survive me. The next morning my mother came into my room while I was pretending to sleep. She sat beside me and said, very softly, "A person can die without the body stopping." I opened my eyes. She was looking straight ahead, not at me. "I did that for years," she continued. "I will not watch you do it too." Then she finally turned to me and placed a velvet box in my lap. Inside was a pair of gold earrings, delicate and old-fashioned, the kind she only wore on important days. "If the day comes when you choose yourself," she said, "wear these." I broke in a way I had been holding back for 2 decades. Not loudly, not dramatically. I just folded over and cried into her lap like a child. She touched my hair and let me. From then on, the wedding stopped feeling like an unavoidable trap and started feeling like a countdown. Meher and I began planning possibilities in coded messages. Plan A was impossible. Convince both families to cancel peacefully. Plan B was unlikely. Fake illness, delay, escape. Plan C was the one neither of us said out loud for several days because it sounded too wild, too dangerous, too cinematic to survive real life. Plan C was this. If the wedding reached the point of no return, I would not walk out as the groom. I would walk out as myself. Meher would support the reveal and end the marriage publicly before the vows trapped us. The risk was enormous. Humiliation, violence, disowning. But everyday Plan C sounded less insane and more honest. You would think once a person decides to do something so life-changing, courage arrives in a clean, straight line. It does not. Courage comes in waves, and between them doubt chews at your bones. Some nights I felt almost electric, certain that truth would save me. Other nights I looked at my father's sleeping figure through the half-open study door and wondered whether I was about to kill him with shame. That is the cruelty of family expectation. Even when it is crushing you, it trains you to feel guilty for shifting its weight. The final week before the wedding became my secret rehearsal for rebirth. My mother helped me under the cover of routine. She sent the servants away early. She taught me how to secure a blouse so the shoulders sat properly, how to anchor a wig line with confidence instead of panic, how to move in jewelry without constantly checking whether it was straight. If you are learning crossdressing and you want one truth nobody says enough, remember this. Anxiety is more visible than any imperfect contour. A calm face can carry 1,000 flaws beautifully. A frightened face ruins even perfect makeup. My mother kept repeating, "Do not perform femininity like a thief. Wear it like it belongs to you." That sentence lives in me now. 2 days before the wedding, Meher sent me a voice note that I still keep saved. She said, "If you back out, I will not hate you. But if you go through with this as the man they expect, I think you will hate yourself for the rest of your life." There are moments when another person hands you a mirror sharper than any glass. That was one. I listened to her message 12 times that night. By the end of it, I knew the ceremony would not happen the way our families imagined. Wedding morning arrived dressed in noise. The house filled before sunrise. Drums, perfume, shouting relatives, trays clattering, children running like escaped thoughts. Everyone kept smiling at me as though they were congratulating. A statue. Samir hovered too close, satisfied that his secret gave him ownership over my spine. My father barked instructions at decorators and caterers. My mother barely spoke. Around noon they dressed me in a sherwani, layered and embroidered and suffocating. I looked magnificent, apparently. Every aunt said so. Every compliment felt like another brick sealing a tomb. When the Barrett was getting ready to leave, there was a small delay because the photographer wanted solo shots. That delay saved my life. I told them I needed 5 minutes alone to pray. No one refused to groom a prayer. I walked straight to my mother's room, locked the door, and stood still while the whole house thundered outside me. The sherwani felt like armor welded to my skin. For 10 full seconds I did nothing. Then I started undoing buttons. I cannot explain the relief of that sound to anyone who has never been trapped in a role. Button after button, layer after layer, expectation fell to the floor. Underneath, I had hidden the first pieces of my real plan. A blouse folded flat, a shapewear layer, a petticoat tied under the excuse of wedding garments. No one would question. My hands moved faster than my thoughts. The red sari lay waiting where my mother had placed it before dawn. The same gold earrings rested beside it. My breath shook, but my movements did not. Years of secret practice rose to the surface exactly when I needed them. Pleats. Tuck. Wrap. Drape. Pin. Adjust. Breathe. And yes, since I know some of you watching these stories actually want to learn something real from them, let me say this clearly. The magic is never only in the clothes. It is in the details. Match the drape to your natural movement, not to some fantasy pose. If your shoulders are broad, do not fight them, balance them. If your hands feel awkward, slow them down instead of hiding them. If your voice shakes, speak softer, not higher. Truth always looks more graceful than imitation. That day I was not trying to become a perfect woman. I was trying to stop being an absent man. Halfway through my makeup, there was a knock on the door so hard I nearly ruined the eyeliner. Our eyes. Samir's voice. What are you doing? For one terrifying second I froze. Then my mother's voice floated down the hallway, sharp as steel. He is praying. Let him breathe. I almost laughed from gratitude. I finished my liner, set my face, added a muted lip color, and then took out Meher's note again. If you come out as your truth, I will not let you stand alone. I tucked the note into my bangles stack like a talisman. When I finally faced the mirror, I did not see a fantasy. I saw history arriving at my skin. I saw the child with the blue dupatta. I saw the teenager wiping off lipstick before dawn. I saw the adult who almost ran away at the gate. And for the first time in my life, none of those selves were fighting one another. They were all here, all looking back through the same eyes. I put on my mother's earrings and whispered, "If everything breaks, let it at least break honestly." Then the fourth turning point crashed through the door. Not literally, though it felt like it. My phone buzzed with a message from Meher. "They've seated me. Your father is angry about the delay. Whatever you do, do it now." Attached was one more line. "And our eyes, don't walk out apologizing." I opened the door. At first no one saw me. The corridor was crowded with women carrying trays, cousins adjusting outfits, one uncle yelling into a phone. Then one tray slipped from someone's hands and hit the floor with a metallic crash. Heads turned. Time changed shape. Every face in that corridor seemed to stop in a different stage of disbelief. A child smiled because children recognize drama before adults recognize truth. An aunt gasped and covered her mouth. Someone whispered my name as if it were suddenly breakable. Samir turned white. My father, who had just entered from the stairs, stopped so abruptly I thought his knees might fail. I wish I could tell you I walked like a queen. I did not. I walked like a person who had spent a lifetime carrying a secret and had finally put it down in public. There is dignity in that, but there is also terror. My pulse was wild. My palms were wet. Yet each step grew steadier because the ground, surprisingly, did not split open. The roof did not fall. I was still alive. Truth had not killed me. It had only made me visible. My father reached me first. His face was not angry yet. That would have been easier. He looked wounded, confused, betrayed at a level beyond language. "Go back," he said very quietly. "Go back right now." I looked at him, truly looked at him, and realized something that changed my fear into grief. He did not know me. Not because I had failed to show him, but because he had never learned how to see anything that threatened his script of the world. "I have been back my whole life," I said. "I am done going back." He raised his hand then, maybe to strike, maybe to grab, maybe just because authority had always lived in that gesture. But before he could touch me, my mother stepped between us. My small, soft-spoken mother, who had spent years folding herself around everyone else's tempers, stood straight and said, "Not today." I have never seen a room change sides so fast without admitting it. People still stared. People still whispered. But the spell of my father's total control cracked in that instant. Samir, of course, tried to recover the situation by turning cruel. "This is sickness," he said loudly, because bullies become louder when their power leaks. "He's humiliating the bride." And that was the line that brought the fifth turning point. From the far end of the decorated hall, Meher herself stood up. She was radiant in bridal gold, and yet the most unforgettable thing about her was how calm she looked. She lifted the front edge of her lehenga and walked toward us through the stunned guests. When she reached my side, she did not step away. She did not act shocked. She looked at the crowd and said, clear enough for everyone to hear. No. He is not humiliating me. He is refusing to lie to me. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I have ever heard. Her father began protesting immediately. Mine joined him. Uncles assembled outrage like a committee. One aunt fainted so theatrically, I would have laughed in any other situation. But Meher kept speaking. She said this marriage would not happen. She said both of us had been pushed into roles we did not choose. She said a wedding built on fear was not sacred, only expensive. I watched the guests' faces and saw something strange. Scandal, yes, but also fascination. People act horrified by honesty mostly because they are starving for it. Then came the sixth blow, sharper than the others. Samir pulled out his phone and announced he had proof that I had been living like this behind everyone's back for years. He started showing people the screenshots he had used to blackmail me. For a moment the crowd tilted again. Shame surged hot and old through my body. He wanted me reduced from a person to a spectacle. And for a second, I almost gave him that victory by shrinking. Instead, I took the phone from his hand. I do not know where the nerve came from. Maybe from desperation. Maybe from rage. Maybe from finally having nothing left worth hiding. I held the phone up, looked at my own blurred image on the screen, and said, yes, that is me. Every whisper stopped. I went on. And it has been me for years. Not because I wanted attention. Not because I wanted to insult anyone. Because this is part of who I am, whether you approve or not. If you want to be shocked that I had to live like a criminal in my own house just to feel real for an hour. A sentence like that does not fix a crowd, but it changes the temperature. Suddenly, they were not just watching a scandal. They were watching a person. Samir tried to laugh it off, but the room had moved beyond him. His power had lived in secrecy. Once I spoke, he became small. The seventh turning point came from the most unexpected source of all, my grandmother. She had been seated near the front the entire time, too old to stand easily, too sharp to miss anything. She beckoned with one finger. The whole room went quiet again, because when old women speak at weddings, tradition still remembers how to listen. I walked to her, knees shaking. She looked up at me for a long time, taking in the sari, the earrings, the tears I was trying not to spill. Then she said, you draped this too tightly on the left side. A few people let out stunned breaths that were almost laughter. She reached up, adjusted one pleat with expert fingers, and added, now stand straight. If you are going to tell the truth, do not hunch. I nearly collapsed from the force of being seen so completely. After that, something irreversible happened. The crowd fractured. Some left in disgust. Some stayed to witness history. A few women moved closer to my mother. A few younger cousins stopped whispering and started watching me with curiosity instead of contempt. The priest, poor man, looked like he was reconsidering his career. Meanwhile, the fathers kept arguing about reputation, cancellation costs, community shame, everything except the actual human beings involved. That is when Meher delivered the eighth turning point with the precision of a blade. She removed her veil, faced both families, and announced that she had accepted her foreign research offer and would be leaving within 2 months, married or not. You can call me stubborn, ruined, ungrateful, modern, whatever helps you sleep, she said. But I will not build a home out of someone else's suffocation. I watched her then with something very close to awe. People think courage must look loud and dramatic. Sometimes it looks like a bride choosing her own future while still wearing wedding jewelry. My father took that harder than my revelation. He could still frame me as damaged, deviant, corrupted. But 2 people refusing the script at once turned the script itself into the problem. He sat down suddenly, as if age had arrived in a single minute. For a brief second I saw not the tyrant of my childhood, but a man whose entire idea of order was collapsing in public. Compassion stirred in me, unwanted but real. Freedom does not erase pain. It rearranges it. Then came the 9th turning point, one I did not expect and still think about often. A woman I barely knew, one of my mother's friends from years ago, stepped out of the guests and said, let him speak properly. Not shout. Not defend.
Speak.
That is a rare gift in chaos. So I did. I told them I had tried to be the son they wanted. I told them I had tried to bury every instinct that looked too soft, too graceful, too feminine. I told them I had nearly married a good woman under false pretenses because I thought silence was nobler than disruption. But silence was not nobility, I said. It was fear dressed like obedience. Some people looked away. Some cried. A few stared harder, as if trying to decide whether honesty was contagious. I also said something for the viewers I know would need to hear it, because every story like this belongs not only to the room where it happens, but to the quiet bedrooms where other people are hiding. I said, if you are different, that does not make you counterfeit. If dressing this way brings you peace, dignity, alignment, whatever word helps you breathe, then your life is not a joke. Do not let people who have never met your pain define your truth as performance.
I was not giving a speech then.
I was bleeding openly. But sometimes bleeding openly is what finally teaches others how wounds look. The 10th turning point came when my mother walked back into the center of the hall carrying something wrapped in white cloth. She opened it and revealed the rest of the jewelry set that matched her earrings. Necklace, bangles, a waist chain. Gasps again because by then the room had become addicted to being shocked. She said, these were meant for the daughter I never had. Today I understand I was wrong. I did have one. I just did not know what form courage would take. I do not think there is language big enough for what those words did to me. I had imagined rejection, chaos, maybe relief. I had not imagined blessing. I wish the story ended there in applause, but life is not a movie that kind. Consequences came quickly. My father declared I was no longer his son. One uncle said I should leave before the situation became uglier. Samir muttered that society would never forget this. Guests began calling relatives who were not even at the wedding, because scandal travels faster than fire. Yet inside the storm, a strange stillness formed around me. Once your worst fear happens and you are still standing, the rest loses some of its teeth. Meher and I moved to one side of the stage, both still dressed for a marriage that would never happen. She laughed first, a tired, disbelieving laugh that cracked into tears. I laughed too. Imagine it. The runaway bride who never ran, and the groom who changed too much to continue. There was absurdity in it and tenderness. She squeezed my hand and said, you realize nobody will ever top this wedding disaster. I replied, good. Let it stay legendary. It was the first joyful thing I had said all day. By evening the hall had emptied enough for the 11th turning point to arrive quietly. My father, who had spent hours in rage and silence, came to where I stood near the exit. He looked older than he had that morning. For a long time he said nothing. Then, without meeting my eyes, he asked, since when? Such a small question after so much destruction. Since when had I known? Since when had I hidden? Since when had he already lost me without noticing? I could have answered in 100 ways. Instead I said, since before I knew how to explain it. He closed his eyes for a second. He did not apologize. Men like him are not rebuilt in a day. But he also did not repeat that I was dead to him. Sometimes the first crack in hardness is not kindness. It is confusion. Even that can become a door. That night I did leave the house, but not by running away in shame. I left with a small suitcase, my mother's blessing, Meher's friendship, and a name I had not yet fully chosen for myself. I went to stay with an old friend from college who already knew enough not to ask stupid questions. For the first time in my life, I slept in feminine clothes without fear of dawn exposing me. I woke up the next morning expecting panic. Instead, I felt hunger. Real hunger. The kind people feel when they have not merely survived, but begun. You might think the story after that is easy. It was not. Videos from the wedding leaked. People online argued whether I was brave, sinful, inspiring, disgusting, fake, broken, iconic, delusional, revolutionary, and about 10 other things strangers use when they want to own someone else's life. Some relatives never spoke to me again. Some spoke privately, but denied me publicly. My father vanished into silence for months. Yet alongside the cruelty came something else I had not prepared for. Messages. Thousands of them. Crossdressers writing that they had never seen themselves treated like full human beings in stories. Women writing that they wished more men understood softness, this honestly. Men writing that they had mocked what they never understood and now felt ashamed. Viewers writing that they watched to the end because for once the twist was not humiliation, but truth. So I kept speaking. Not just about pain, but about practice because healing also lives in the practical. I made content about how to drape for different body frames, how to choose colors that flatter undertones, how to sit elegantly in tight garments without fidgeting, how to remove makeup gently instead of punishing the skin, how to carry yourself safely in public, how to know the difference between expression and performance for approval. I kept saying the same thing in different ways. Confidence is not loudness, femininity is not weakness, and crossdressing is not automatically deception. Sometimes it is art. Sometimes it is comfort. Sometimes it is identity practice. Sometimes it is the only doorway a person has toward their deepest truth. What matters is honesty with yourself. Months later came the 12th and final turning point, the one that truly closed the circle. My father called me. Not texted. Called. His voice sounded rough, smaller somehow. He said my grandmother was unwell and asking for me. I went back to the house I had left, heart pounding like I was 19 again. My grandmother was in bed, annoyed by everyone and very much alive in spirit. She took one look at me and said, "You learn to drape better." I laughed through tears. Then my father entered the room carrying tea. He set one cup near me without comment. No grand reconciliation. No cinematic embrace. But in homes like ours, sometimes the first offering of tea is louder than an apology. Over the next year, he did not transform magically into a perfectly understanding parent. I will not lie to you for the sake of a neat ending. He stumbled. He avoided certain conversations. He still flinched when neighbors asked difficult questions. But he stopped pretending I was a stain to be scrubbed out. He started, awkwardly and inconsistently, to ask practical questions instead of accusatory ones. Was I safe? Was I working? Was people's reactions settling down? Love, after damage, can return wearing work clothes instead of poetry. I learned to respect even its clumsy forms. As for Meher, she left for her program exactly as she promised. At the airport, she hugged me and said, "Imagine if we had actually gone through with that wedding." I told her I preferred us as co-conspirators. She laughed and said, "Same." People sometimes ask if I loved her. I answer that love does not always want possession. Sometimes it wants witness. She witnessed my becoming, and I witnessed her refusal to shrink. That is a form of love most marriages never reach. If you are still with me now, all the way at the end, then hear me carefully. The most dangerous thing that happened on my wedding day was not that a groom wore a sari. It was that truth entered a room built entirely for performance. That is what shook people. Not fabric. Not makeup. Not jewelry. Truth. The bride was waiting, yes, but the groom changed. And what changed was not only the outfit. It was the contract, the silence, the script, the inherited lie that family honor matters more than a living soul. I still keep Meher's note. I still wear my mother's earrings on the days I need courage. I still remember my grandmother correcting my pleats while the whole world stared. And sometimes late at night, I think about that little boy in the blue dupatta during the power cut. If I could speak to him now, I would tell him this. They will try to shame your softness because they cannot control what it teaches them. Learn anyway. Learn how to stand. Learn how to drape. Learn how to breathe through eyeliner mistakes and heartbreak and public judgment. Learn that your hands are not wrong for moving gently. Learn that your reflection is not your enemy. Learn that hiding may keep you safe for a season, but it will never make you whole. Because the day may come when everyone is waiting for you to play the role they wrote, and you will have only a few minutes, one locked door, one shaking breath, and one impossible choice. When that day comes, I hope you remember me. I hope you remember that I walked out terrified and lived. I hope you remember that authenticity may cost you comfort, but pretending can cost you your entire life. I hope you remember that even if a crowd gasps, even if a father breaks, even if a wedding burns down around your feet, there is a version of freedom on the other side that feels like finally hearing your own name for the first time. And if someday you find yourself standing before a mirror, adjusting a pleat, wiping away fear with the edge of your palm, wondering whether the world will ever let you be seen, let me answer what I once begged the darkness to answer for me. Yes, the world may resist you. Yes, some people will misunderstand you on purpose. Yes, visibility can hurt. But no lie, no matter how beautifully decorated, will ever feel as powerful as one honest step taken in your own skin. I know, because a bride was waiting for me, and the groom changed. And in changing, I finally arrived.